how did you connect the dots with your specific gastroparesis to the vagus nerve? And then talk to us about how that impacted your ability to have a bowel movement. I remember that was a significant issue for you in your story. And
That's
then
good.
a little bit about the role of acetylcholine in vagus nerve dysfunction.
Oh boy. Okay. This is quite a story. This is kind of the story of how a patient figures out what the doctors are missing, right? Kind of reminds me of the joke, why does the rabbit outrun the fox? Because the fox is racing for his dinner and the rabbit is racing for his life. I was the rabbit. I was desperate for answers. I wasn't getting help from any of my doctors, the foxes, but the doctors didn't have to live with me 24/7, and they didn't have to see the suffering, and they didn't have to endure it. My motivation for answers was rightfully so stronger than theirs. I was suffering. You see, my constipation had gotten so bad, Scott, that I ended up with complete gastroparesis. Nothing was moving. And it had been like that for 11 days. And I had tried everything, no result. I went to my primary care doctor and she wasn't able to offer anything I hadn't already tried. I did tell her that I was having some dull pain in my lower right hand abdominal area. So out of desperation, I just don't think she had any idea what to do. She sent me to a urologist to see if maybe I had a weird kidney stone. And the urologist was super nice and really smart. And I told him I was considering the possibility that my gastroparesis was due to vagus nerve damage. And at the time, I was thinking maybe it was compressed at my neck. I asked him if the pain in my abdomen could maybe be a bad ileocecal valve, the valve between the large and small intestine. Well, he gave me some of that nasty dye to drink and imaged me for kidney stones, and I got the all clear. He thought it was a brilliant idea about the ileocecal valve, though. So he sent me to a surgeon to see what the surgeon thought about the valve. And I remember the surgeon said, Diana, if you're afraid your vagus nerve is defective for any reason, don't have abdominal surgery unless it's life-threatening. We cut right through that nerve. We cause gastroparesis. And I appreciated his honesty, but I left there with no answers and no bowel movement. Stay with me here. There's a point to all this. I ended up going to the emergency room. I was looking at about 2 weeks with no bowel movement at that point. Well, that combined with being so sick, it was just too much. And they gave me a prokinetic, Reglan, and it did nothing. Then something amazing happened. I got a kidney stone. I called the urologist and said, I understand I didn't have a kidney stone 3 days ago, but I do now. So he met me at the hospital, removed the stone. And when I woke up, he was like right here. And he said, Diana, you were right. It's your ileocecal valve. I said, how do you know? He said, well, that dye I gave you 3 days ago, it's still in there, but it's all crammed up against the valve. I thought, great, we know what's wrong. What do I do? I have no idea. So I went home and I'm there all alone with no help. I had no idea of where to turn next. As patients, that's kind of where we're often left, right? Nowhere to turn, no answers. It's not a good feeling. So I laid there and I thought, I'm on my own here. I'll do the only thing I know to do. Let's just assume I'm right. Let's just say this is a vagus nerve problem. I had no idea if the nerve was compressed, but I was going to assume it wasn't working. What could I do? So I thought about the anatomy I learned. Scott, it was like 35 years before that. Weird. I know that I remember that. And I thought about the structure of the nerve. I remembered there were two parts to the nerve. There's the long preganglionic portion that goes from the brain all the way down to the organs. And there's a gap, or a little synapse, I call it. Then there's a tiny postganglionic nerve that communicates with the organ. I remember the professor saying, the postganglionic nerve is so small, it's almost a part of the organ itself. Again, so weird that I remember this out of the lecture. Now, nerves communicate with a chemical that jumps across synapse. There's no direct connection between the two parts of the nerve, nor the nerve and the organ. There's release of a chemical or neurotransmitter that jumps across, lands on a receptor. I thought, if my preganglionic nerve is defunct, I should still have a postganglionic nerve, right? I haven't had abdominal surgery, luckily. It should still be there. So I thought I'd introduce the neurotransmitter artificially to see if I could get the postganglionic nerve to respond. And the neurotransmitter for the vagus nerve is acetylcholine. but that's not an injectable drug. The body breaks it down immediately, which is why there's no blood test for this. Instead, you have to use an imitator of the neurotransmitter, what we call an agonist. I asked myself, okay, what's the agonist for acetylcholine at the vagus nerve? Well, that was easy. The vagus nerve is the only nicotinic acetylcholinergic nerve in the body. We use that term because its agonist is nicotine. So I called my husband at the office and asked him to bring home a nicotine patch from the drugstore on his way home. His response was like, "What are you up to now?" He was really used to me running some experiments on my body, but I told him I'll explain it later. I put the patch on my lower right-hand abdominal area. I didn't know if it mattered where I put it, but I imagined the nicotine kind of going through the skin and landing on that postganglionic vagus nerve's receptor. And I hope for the best. Well, about an hour and a half later, things started to move. The valve opened. I had a normal bowel movement. I thought, what? I used that patch every day for 4 days. It worked every time. So I called a few people with gastroparesis spots and asked them, do you want to try something? Am I going crazy? It worked for them too. I had to stop using nicotine though because it activates inflammation. My stomach looked like it had been attacked by fire ants. I was miserable. But the experiment taught me two things. And one, I didn't have some rare autoimmune disorder affecting the receptor. My receptor worked fine. It just wasn't getting the signal. All the research into POTS at that point revolved around autoimmunity. And I knew that likely that wasn't correct for most of us. So instead, we turned all the research at genetic disease investigators elsewhere. We went away from autoimmunity. Two, it told me that either I had a defunct preganglionic vagus nerve or I had a neurotransmitter problem. And that was the next puzzle.